We begin the day with growing fears in Ukraine that foreign aid and shipments of foreign weapons are about to become a thing of the past. The question, just how reliable are Ukraine's allies when it comes to aid in the fight against Russia? Now, this week, high-level EU talks in Brussels could decide the fate of a promised 50 billion euros in aid to Kyiv, as well as additional money for new weapons shipments. Ukraine is also hoping for an invitation that would officially start the lengthy process of becoming a member of the European Union. It's important to note that in the European Union, any agreement on those key issues, it has to be unanimous. And Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, he's been signaling that he is not ready to fall into line. Orban is widely considered one of Vladimir Putin's closest allies in Europe and one of the few leaders who has not sided with Ukraine. Tonight, across the European Union, there is dismay that Budapest might block support for Ukraine's battle against its Russian invaders. Here's German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin.
This is something that really needs our collective effort. But if we formulate this message from Europe, from the community of European, international friends and supporters of Ukraine, then it's also a message to the Russian president. And it would be a very important message if we told him, don't count on it.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy had a chance to air his concerns over EU support when he came face-to-face with Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Argentina. Now, both men were in Buenos Aires for the inauguration of the newly elected Argentinian president, Javier Milei. They were seen here briefly exchanging words with each other. Oh, if we could only hear them. Zelenskyy later said that it was a straightforward conversation focused on Ukraine's European affairs. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy facing pushback from Hungary and from some U.S. lawmakers. Zelenskyy is now in Washington, D.C. at a crucial moment. Wartime funding for Ukraine is facing political headwinds with a $61 billion package still stuck in Congress. And he says this deadlock is only helping Russia.
If there's anyone inspired by unresolved issues on Capitol Hill, it's just Putin and his sick clique. They see the dreams come true when they see the delays.
Zelenskyy there on that sick clique. DW's Amien Essif has more now on President Zelenskyy's trip to Washington.
These things are directly connected in Ukrainians' minds. They know that the thing that's protecting them the most, especially behind the front lines in Kiev, are these advanced weapons that are coming almost exclusively from the West. So you have the Patriot missile system, also the German-made air defense system. And there's a lot of doubt now coming from the U.S., which is not just Ukraine's largest provider, but it provides more weapons than the rest of the world combined. There's a lot of doubt coming from the U.S. now that right-wing Republicans have taken over the House and saying that they're not going to support Ukraine unless Biden concedes on certain domestic issues. So that is absolutely why Zelenskyy is there in the U.S. He's going to meet Biden tomorrow. He's also going to meet with the Speaker of the House to try to work out a deal and save the aid for Ukraine before the year ends. That's important to him. It's also important to this country, and especially for when I'm talking to people in Kiev, they know that their skies are protected by these American-made weapons.
DW Special Correspondent Amien Essif tonight in Kyiv. Amien, thank you. My guest now has made a career focusing on human rights and mental health. Robert Van Voren is Chief Executive of the Federation Global Initiative on Psychiatry. He's an honorary member of the Ukrainian Psychiatric Association. Mr. Van Voren, it's good to have you with us. Before we start tonight, I would like to read something that you wrote in late March of 2022. You write, watching what is happening now makes my heart bleed and it keeps me awake at night. I am worried about my friends and about the fate of the consumers of mental health services who are terrified by the indiscriminate bombing. Now, that was about a month into this war, nearly 2 years ago. What goes through your mind when you hear those words read back to you now?
Nothing changed. It's still exactly the same. I basically live the war in Ukraine. I try to do what I can do. I'm supporting my friends, both in the front and the ones that are trying to help those who are suffering from the consequences of this war. And I don't know, you get used a little bit to a bleeding heart, but of course it's very difficult. And especially the knowledge that this war is not going to end very quickly. It's going to last. And if you calculate on basis of the figures that we have, what the consequences are going to be in the long term, this is absolutely shocking. It's something that we haven't seen in Europe since the Second World War. And the war that is now being fought is very similar to the trench war in northern France during the First World War. Mm-hmm. And so from history, we know the consequences. And how do we prepare a country for the life after this war, to deal with everything that is now, all the damage that is now being done? It's horrendous. It's horrendous.
Are you talking about a collective trauma here, the whole country experiencing the same trauma, and that trauma coming not from what has happened, but from the fear of what could and probably will happen?
You know, I'm very hesitant of using the word trauma all the time because it's a very kind of fashionable word. In general, I think mankind is very resilient. We can survive a lot. Yes, we are depressed. Yes, we're panicking. Yes, we have depression. But with things in place, we are managing to survive that and recover from it and continue life. Mm-hmm. What is important is the possibility of having your family, having a work, having a roof over your head, and continuing your life. So these are very basic things that, reduce the number of people that have long-term psychological consequences. But if I look only at the people fighting at the front, mm-hmm. We are talking about 600, 700,000 Ukrainians that have frontline experience. Mm-hmm. And this is not just it's not a normal front. It's imagine the images of the Somme in northern France in 2016, 2017. This is what we are dealing with right now. So these are tens and tens of thousands of Ukrainian servicemen, men, women, many of them very young, who will have long-term consequences and who will need to get support. And then the whole issue is that these fighters, they come back home. They have a family. So the family is affected. The community is affected. And so this is a huge problem for which the country has no system in place. Yes, there are lots of wonderful initiatives. There are lots of people who are doing really all the best they can. But if you calculate that maybe between 10-20% of those fighting at the front will need professional help, we're talking about, up to 120,000 people right now.
These are huge numbers. And it reminds me of the discussions that were held in the United States after the Vietnam War and how that country's healthcare system, mental health system failed its returning veterans. But what you're talking about in Ukraine, we know that even before this war, Ukraine's mental health system was strained. And now a war has been put on top of that. I mean, it almost sounds like this is an impossible task.
It sounds like impossible, but it also is a very good opportunity. Veterans, U.S. veterans that came back to the United States came to a country which was fairly, I would say, wealthy, which could afford a system. Ukraine will be very poor, partially destroyed, with a healthcare system or a mental health care system which was outdated before the start of the invasion. Many professionals have left, so a deficit of mental health care professionals. But it also means that this crisis you can use in order to bring about a shift in paradigm, which is that instead of a psychiatrist-centered psychiatry, you can develop one whereby you have multidisciplinary approaches, where you use veterans for peer-to-peer support, because they are the ones who live through it. They understand what veterans are talking about. And so this actually might be the moment that what we hoped for or tried for decades will now finally be possible in Ukraine and to build up a new kind of mental health care system. But it's going to take a major effort.
Well, at least there's a positive point there, and I know a lot of people will share with you the hope that this paradigm shift, that it takes place to the benefit of those soldiers returning home. Mr. Robert Van Voren, we appreciate your time and your excellent insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting.